2019 brought another Friday night to Carmine's Italian restaurant in Manhattan, the kind of evening where laughter mixed with clinking glasses and the smell of authentic Italian cuisine filled every corner. Over 30 years of operation had made this place a neighborhood staple, attracting regulars and tourists alike who came for the food and stayed for the atmosphere. Maria Santoro carried plates with the kind of ease that only comes from doing something well for nearly 5 years, weaving between tables as she took orders and served drinks to the steady stream of guests pouring through the doors. Her coworkers knew her as someone who showed up, did the job right, and treated customers like they mattered, and most of the regulars called her by name when they walked in. That particular Friday, nobody could have predicted that before the night ended, something would happen that would change Maria's life and expose just how dark workplace dynamics could become. Running the show that evening was Raymond DeLuca, the general manager who'd held the position for 3 years and earned himself a reputation among the staff for being someone who turned nasty when things didn't go his way. Around 8 o'clock, with the restaurant hitting its busiest moment, Raymond sat in his office going through the night's paperwork when he spotted what looked like a mistake on one of Maria's orders, and that mistake was about to set everything in motion. If this story is hitting you hard, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable true stories that will leave you speechless. Red-faced and furious, Raymond left his office looking for Maria the moment he thought he'd found her error, calling her name sharply when he spotted her heading toward the kitchen and motioning for her to follow him into the back. What unfolded next would stay burned into Maria's memory forever, as she found herself alone with her manager in the cramped employee bathroom, a small space with nowhere to hide and no one to witness what was about to happen. Behind that closed door, Raymond's voice climbed louder and louder as he unleashed his anger about the mistake he believed Maria had made, refusing to let her say a single word in her own defense. She listened to him call her incompetent and careless, heard him tell her she was a disgrace to the restaurant, and absorbed the threat that he'd fire her right then and there if she didn't get her act together. None of what Raymond was screaming about mattered, because the error he was raging over turned out to be his own mistake, something Maria tried desperately to explain while her manager continued his assault without stopping. The language he used went beyond just being rude, crossing into territory that felt genuinely abusive and designed to hurt rather than correct. Standing there with tears running down her face, Maria felt powerless and humiliated in a way she'd never experienced before, trapped in that small bathroom with a man who wouldn't even listen to the truth. 10 minutes of this felt like hours to her, and as it dragged on, she began questioning whether something was wrong with her or if her boss had completely lost control of himself. Unknown to Raymond and Maria, someone sitting in the dining room that night possessed the kind of connections that would completely change the outcome of what was happening in that bathroom. Anthony Santoro, Maria's husband, had arrived at Carmine's with a plan to surprise his wife before she finished her shift so they could go out and celebrate some very good news that had just come into their lives. They were expecting their first child, and Anthony wanted to mark the occasion with a special evening, so he'd shown up about 10 minutes before the bathroom incident and gotten himself a quiet table in the corner. Reviewing his phone while he waited, Anthony caught Maria's eye when she brought out his water and appetizer, and they shared a quick smile and glance that confirmed she understood the surprise. Success in business had come naturally to Anthony, though describing exactly what his business was required, speaking in careful terms, and understanding that certain circles didn't ask too many questions about the details. Connected deeply to organized crime families operating throughout the area, Anthony held a high-ranking position in what law enforcement identified as the Genovese crime family, and throughout that world, people knew him as someone who protected what belonged to him. Those who understood his reputation understood that disrespecting Anthony's family came with a price, and he had a well-earned name for being someone who responded swiftly to that kind of disrespect. When Maria disappeared into the back with Raymond and didn't return to her tables, concern crept into Anthony's mind, so he got up and walked toward the back of the restaurant to see what was taking so long. Hearing Raymond's raised voice, mixed with what sounded unmistakably like his wife crying, changed everything about how Anthony was about to spend the rest of his evening. Opening the bathroom door without any hesitation, Anthony stepped inside, and his sheer presence transformed that cramped space into something heavy with tension that neither Raymond nor Maria could escape. Looking up in absolute shock, Raymond's face drained of color the moment he saw this unfamiliar man. But what truly alarmed him was watching Maria's entire body respond the instant she saw her husband. Fumbling for words, Raymond tried to explain that he was simply having a work-related conversation about performance, but his voice came out weak and hollow, completely unconvincing. Standing across from him with a cold, measured stare that seemed to look right through the manager, Anthony let the silence hang there until Raymond began understanding the magnitude of his situation. What that silence communicated to Raymond was a simple fact. He had absolutely no idea who Maria was married to, and that realization crashed down on him like a weight. In a calm voice that somehow carried more threat than any shout could, Anthony asked Raymond to explain precisely what he'd been saying to his wife and why tears were covering her face. Struggling to find words that made sense, Raymond's mouth opened and closed uselessly because the reality of what was about to happen to him was becoming undeniably clear. Anthony then placed his hand gently on Maria's shoulder and told her to return to the dining area, instructing her to inform the other staff that she was finished for the night and should leave through the front entrance. Maria understood immediately what the gravity of that moment meant, and knowing what her husband was capable of, she followed his instructions without question or hesitation. Once Maria had gone and Anthony locked the door behind her, he turned his complete focus toward Raymond, who now stood trembling despite trying everything in his power to appear composed and unafraid. Speculation and rumors about what happened between Anthony and Raymond in that bathroom spread quickly through Manhattan's restaurant community in the weeks that followed, but the men themselves never disclosed exactly what had been said or done behind that closed door. Raymond DeLuca's employment at Carmine's ended that very night, and his position disappeared from the payroll within hours, never to be filled again by the same title. Frank Rossi, who owned the restaurant, received a visitor early Saturday morning carrying a message from someone connected to Anthony Santoro, and after that conversation ended, Raymond's termination became official and final, with no explanation provided to the staff. The restaurant released a statement claiming Raymond had chosen to pursue other opportunities elsewhere, but everyone who worked there knew that story didn't match reality. When Maria returned to work the following week, the shift in how people treated her was immediate and unmistakable, as coworkers and customers alike showed her a respect and consideration she'd never received in her 5 years there before. Her colleagues who'd heard the whispers about what transpired in that bathroom made absolutely certain they treated Maria with professionalism and genuine kindness. Frank Rossi personally told Maria he was sorry for what she'd experienced and made it clear that Carmine's would not tolerate the kind of behavior Raymond had displayed toward anyone on staff. Within 6 months, Angela DeMarco took over as general manager, running the restaurant with a balance of strength and fairness that created an environment where employees felt valued and respected. As for Raymond, he vanished from Manhattan's restaurant industry completely, with no trace of employment anywhere in the area after he left Carmine's that night. The incident at Carmine's exposed a reality that runs through restaurants across the entire country, where harassment and verbal abuse from managers happen far more often than most people ever discover or acknowledge. Countless victims endure this treatment in silence, with no one there to defend them or ensure that consequences follow. And most people trapped in situations like Maria's have no wealthy or connected spouse waiting to intervene. Every single day, thousands of workers face humiliation and disrespect from supervisors who hold power over their paychecks and schedules, and many accept it quietly because losing the job feels scarier than enduring the abuse. While labor laws exist to protect workers from this treatment and companies have adopted policies against harassment, violations continue happening at a steady pace because the system relies on victims being brave enough to file complaints. Maria's case stood out as almost unbelievable, specifically because her abuser faced immediate and direct consequences for what he'd done, something that almost never occurs in ordinary workplace situations. Typically, victims navigate lengthy complaint processes, write formal reports, sit through investigations, and then hope management actually takes them seriously enough to act. The power sits entirely with the employer in these situations, which means speaking up frequently leads to retaliation, getting fired, or being marked as difficult within your industry. Maria's experience also raises uncomfortable questions about who really gets to administer justice and what happens when justice occurs completely outside legal and official channels. These issues about organized crime filling the void when legitimate systems fail, people have existed throughout history and continue today. Standing at Carmine's that night, the difference between having protection and lacking it became starkly visible in the way events unfolded compared to how they typically go for most workers. Maria possessed something most people never get, which was a husband whose power and connections meant that abusing her came with actual consequences he could enforce. Raymond's blindness to who Maria really was represented something darker, a failure to understand that treating vulnerable people badly can come back on you in ways you never anticipated. Restaurants across America operate within a system where managers use their authority to control staff, knowing full well that most workers cannot afford to lose their jobs and will tolerate whatever they dish out. Breaking this pattern requires real change in workplace policies, actual enforcement of the laws that already exist, better systems that protect workers from losing everything if they report harassment, and a complete shift in how society views restaurant workers and the abuse they accept. What Anthony did by stepping in for his wife was extraordinary and represented something most people could never experience, and treating his intervention as though it solves anything broader would be a serious mistake. Organized crime historically fills a role in communities where legitimate justice systems have abandoned people, and that's exactly why it maintains power and influence in neighborhoods where it operates. Anthony handled his situation by using his connections and position rather than calling police or filing paperwork, which shows precisely how organized crime keeps its grip on society. For people in vulnerable positions who don't trust official systems or feel they have no access to real justice, this kind of alternative protection becomes dangerously appealing. Workplace harassment remains a serious problem affecting millions of people across America every single day, and Maria's unusual story should not create the impression that most victims experience any kind of resolution. While her situation had an extraordinary ending because of who her husband was and what he could do, the average person facing harassment has no such option and must navigate the system alone. If you're experiencing harassment, bullying, or abuse at work, you have options available that can help you address the situation without waiting for someone else to intervene. Contact the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or your state's labor board to file a complaint, reach out to legal aid organizations in your area, or consult with an employment lawyer who can explain your rights. Every person deserves to go to work without facing disrespect or humiliation, regardless of what job they do or where they sit on the organizational chart. Creating workplaces where management understands that their authority comes with responsibility rather than entitlement requires constant pressure and attention from workers and society alike. If this story grabbed you the way it grabbed us, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so you see more true stories that will challenge how you think about the world. Share this with people in your life. Drop a comment about what you think should happen in cases like this, and tell us whether you believe Raymond got what he deserved or if real justice had to come through official channels.